every time I open my Instagram right now, like there's a lot of psychedelics coming through, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
a huge fan of psychedelics and plants and plant consciousness. But I see people on there talking about, oh, psilocybin healed me, or the ibogaine like completely resolved my postpartum depression. And it's like, these are tools. And sometimes when I see people speaking like that, I'm like, what would you say if a mechanic made a reel and he was like, this wrench transformed my car, right? No, we all know that it's not the wrench. It's the skill and the way that the incredible mechanic with years and years of experience knows how to use the wrench. And I think that when it comes to healing and our medical system, we've so been trained to outsource our power to a pill, a supplement, an injection, a peptide, right? A
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic.
Even a doctor, right? A person, right?
Doctor,
Mm-hmm.
this person healed me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that comment you made was really important to me. I sort of wanted to go back to it because
Sure.
ultimately, like, you are the healer, right?
Welcome to the True Healing Experience podcast. I am your host, Dana Herrera, and with me today, an amazing human, soul, woman, doctor, practitioner, healer, Dr. Erica Matluck. Dr. Erica has been doing this for the last 20 years. She is a nurse practitioner as well as a naturopathic doctor, a teacher, a healer, and what I love about her story is that our paths are very similar, and she has the conventional medicine as well as the spiritual path, as well as the holistic health in her background. She is the creator of the seven senses as well as the holistic intelligence method. And that is the understanding that in order to truly uncover disease and go to the root, we have to look at four dimensions, four quadrants: spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. Sound familiar? So when I met Erica, and I let her tell the story of how we were introduced, everything in me, everything in my soul and in my body said, you have to talk to this woman because we have been entrusted on this planet with the same truth, the same message, and we're going to get into that today. So, Dr. Erica, thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How do we know each other? How did you and I get introduced?
Gosh, we were introduced by someone who I find so inspiring. And the first word that comes to mind when I think of him is a father, because he reached out to me in my private practice over a year ago when his son was really struggling with some pretty serious health issues. And he had pretty much like dedicated his entire life to helping his son not only like deal with his health issues but like figure out really how to get to the bottom of them. And they were traveling constantly from Mayo clinics to alternative specialists. And it ended up being at the time that I didn't think it was the right fit to really for me to support his son. But at the time I said something to him. I said, who's taking care of you through this process? And I was just so moved by how he showed up as a father for his son. And then ultimately he started working with me, and he's one of many who I've just had the great honor of watching such a profound transformation and such deep, deep healing work, both on the personal level and the parental level. And yeah, he sent me a WhatsApp and he said, I met someone in Barcelona that I think you would really resonate with. And here we are.
Amazing. And yes, I second that. I haven't known him for as long as you have, but in the short time that I have, I mean, we've been able to talk. We talk pretty frequently, and just hearing his stories and how he talks about his son, how he's dealing with it and how he's grieving it, but how he's carrying the mission of just loving and bringing light into the world despite the grief is absolutely inspiring. And I feel grateful and blessed to have met him, and now grateful and blessed to have met you, because I'm so excited to talk about your work. work. And so I want to preface, so your terminology for the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual is the four quadrants, correct?
That's how I speak about them. But sometimes I say dimensions
Dimension?
too, or
Okay.
components.
Yeah. Yeah. They're called, yeah, aspects, whatever you want to call them. It's called, the vocabulary is interchangeable, right? So, what I would love to know is, where were you, I guess, maybe in your personal or your professional life, or what was going on when you figured out, you know what? If healing is not just physical. We cannot just focus on the body. We have to look deeper. And we also, by the way, have to separate the mind from the emotions, because I think that's a very key part. A lot of the mind, body, soul thing, the mind your thoughts are totally different than your emotions, which obviously you and I understand very well, but not everybody does. So let's go to the first question. So at what point did you just decide in your professional life or personal life, like, there's more than just this physical healing that our conventional, healthcare system is focused on?
Well, in my personal life, I feel like I sort of always knew this. But in my personal life, I didn't realize how problematic it was that the system really compartmentalizes it, because I understood it within myself, right? So I could, go to an energy worker to work on something energetic, and I could go to a gynecologist to do my, annual women's health visit. And I could go to a therapist to talk about some patterns or mindset or whatever it was. And within myself, I could sort of connect the dots. But it was really when I was working in primary care. And, in primary care, I served as sort of like a subspecialist in a general medical practice. And so some people came to me as their primary care practitioner. Others were referred to me by someone else in the practice because they were dealing with some kind of condition that, the conventional method just didn't work very well for. So I saw a lot of things like, a lot of syndromes, a lot of
Mm,
PCOS, IBS, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease,
interesting. Yeah, a lot
um,
of autoimmune.
a lot of
Hmm.
autoimmune stuff, a lot of stuff that just like didn't really respond well to quick fix pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
And what's interesting is when you have a medical condition that the medical system doesn't know how to really support you through and can't really give you answers. Two things happen. You become anxious because, quite frankly, it's scary when even the best specialists of the world don't know what's going on in your body. And two, you kind of get depressed because after a lot of, work and healing and consultations and time and money, you're like, I don't know when and if I'm ever going to get back to my old life. And so what I started seeing in my practice is that not only were people being referred to me, but people were being referred to psychiatrists,
Hmm.
people who had very, very clear physiologic, physical health issues were being sent to psychologists and psychiatrists because primary care providers and the specialists didn't really know what to do with them.
I have a
And
story
so
there when you're done with this part about my mom. That's what happened to her.
I
Hmm.
was sort of forced to become a mental health practitioner very quickly. And I was working in San Francisco at the time. We had a shortage of psychiatrists, certainly ones that accepted insurance in the city. And we had truly a mental health crisis in our clinic, which was actually a pretty big operation. We had several offices in the city. And so I was, before I even went into medical practice, I was a Reiki master. And I also was
Love it.
a highly, practiced yogi. And I ended up with a small team putting together what we called group medical visits. And we brought groups of patients together who were dealing mostly with mental health diagnoses, and we brought in yogic tools. We brought in the idea of community as a therapeutic tool. And I really started to see things differently. I really started to see all the dots connect. Like basically what I had been doing in my own health, I started to see how it worked for others. And I started to see how when the system refers you to a mental health specialist or an endocrinologist or says, oh, maybe you should try acupuncture, but then the acupuncturist isn't talking to the endocrinologist. And the Ayurvedic practitioner is sort of speaking a different language than your rheumatologist. And you, as the individual, don't really see or understand how it all fits together. It's like I saw patients in a tug of war with themselves, right? I saw them, you're doing great work with your acupuncturist and you're doing great work with your therapist. But those two, those efforts, those bodies of work are actually not driving you toward the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to see that when we coordinated those efforts, as I would say, of like the 4 quadrants,
Mm-hmm.
we started to see better results. And then, of course, I felt very limited in how I could really do that for people in 20-minute visits. And
Yeah,
ultimately,
that'd be
had to,
tough.
leave the
Yeah.
paradigm to be
Yep.
able to do it in a way that I felt like was really in integrity with what I knew to be true about well-being and healing.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So, and very similar story. I was not one of the practitioners. I was on the business side, but I was interacting with the patients constantly and constantly referring them to other physicians and constantly sending out when referrals were coming in and just part of different parts of the system within the traditional healthcare model. And I saw the exact same thing. And and then I saw it in regenerative medicine where, we're giving people stem cells and it's incredible regenerative medicine. But if you're in fight or flight, if you don't believe you could heal, if you have stored trauma that's producing inflammation, all the stem cells in the world aren't going to help, right? And so I think we have very similar paths in that sense. So then how did you then decide, you know what? I see what the problem is. I I know how to fix it, but the world in which I live in does not facilitate that. So I need to get out of this box, shift the paradigm, and do something else. So when did you start down that path?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I feel like 2 things happened around the same time. One thing that I saw happen was the world started to change. And in 2011, I remember being in my office and suggesting to someone with anxiety that we do some like breathing tools or what now, we call nervous system regulation
Regulation,
tools.
yeah.
And I remember like people getting mad at me and demanding Xanax prescriptions and storming out of my office. And, and then 2012, 2013, starting to see people who were curious. Like, I read about mindfulness. I read about meditation. Do you think that that could help me? I don't
Mm,
want to be on psych meds. Like, what else can we do? So I felt really blessed that, like, what happened in my practice was that as people were waking up to this sort of possibility, a non-pharmacologic approach, I was sort of perfectly positioned and they found me. And so
great.
I started to get volume to really be able to prove my theory to myself that this works. And I was really blessed to be at a pretty big primary care group with a very innovative founder at a time when like there was a lot of funding in Silicon Valley. I was in San Francisco at the time, and there was a lot of room in our practice for innovation.
It's
And
great.
basically, I started feeling a little bit stifled long before I left, in the sense that like I'm a very grounded person, and I did not have a problem prescribing a birth control pill But I also firmly believe that when we shut down our hormonal cycle, we are shutting down some degree of emotional intelligence, and we're impacting who we're attracted to. We're impacting our desire nature. We're impacting the endocrine system in a way that impacts whether we're going to get pregnant, who we're going to choose as partners, right? There's like spiritual and emotional implications of this. And when I would talk talk about this to my colleagues, they would kind of laugh. Like, oh, yeah, next you're going to be teaching patients about the phases of the moon. And it's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's
Because
energy. Everything is energy. Yeah.
as above, so below, we are
Mhm.
truly all connected. And I
Mhm.
believe that when we lose that, when we forget the miracle that we are, that like we have a mental health crisis, right? And we do.
And then we have a
So
physical health crisis, right?
that's right. That's
Yep.
right. And I loved how you said that about the stem cells. If there's not belief, if there's not, intention, like the tool doesn't really work. And I think
Yep.
that that's a really important concept. Every time I open my Instagram right now, like there's a lot of psychedelics coming through, and I'm
Mhm.
a huge fan of psychedelics and plants and plant consciousness. But I see people on there talking about, oh, psilocybin healed me, or the ibogaine like completely resolved my postpartum depression. And it's like, these are tools. And sometimes when I see people speaking like that, I'm like, what would you say if a mechanic made a reel and he was like, this wrench transformed my car, right? No, we all know that it's not the wrench. It's the skill and the way that the incredible mechanic with years and years of experience knows how to use the wrench. And I think that when it comes to healing and our medical system, we've so been trained to outsource our power to a pill, a supplement, an injection, a peptide, right? A
Mhm.
psychedelic.
Even a doctor, right? A person, right?
Doctor,
Mhm.
this person healed me.
Mhm.
And, I think that comment you made is really important to me. I sort of wanted to go back to it because
Sure.
ultimately, like, you are the healer, right?
Right.
And it's like understanding that by utilizing these four quadrants and understanding the different mechanisms of action between all four, you can make any tool more efficient, right? And you can create and impact outcomes that you want in that way. And
Absolutely.
so back to your question, I think that I started to feel stifled long before I left. And I got in the practice of asking myself the question, am I still becoming better at what it is that I want to do in this environment? Am I still learning? And do I still feel like I'm able to like care for people in a way that feels in integrity?
Mhm.
And
Good
the
question.
answer remained yes, but the yes got smaller and smaller and
Mm.
smaller over the years. And it was in 2016, 2017, I met my partner who is a master of sound. And what's funny is that I had been a practitioner of yoga for a long time, but I had never thought about sound and its impact on consciousness. And not only did I meet someone who was interested in that, I met, and of course I'm biased, the master.
That-
He is so
yes.
talented and has such a depth of understanding and a gift to know the perfect sound to play at any given moment to change someone's state. And
So
so
cool.
his sound work really opened me up to a whole nother dimension. And then in 2017, we did our first retreat. I
Okay.
prefer to call them immersions now, together where we weaved our work. And after I did that, it was sort of like this night and day, like seeing myself in an environment where I had no limitation
Mm-hmm.
versus, my clinic where,
Right.
the lights were fluorescent and there were no windows and all kinds of rules and time limitations. And when I saw sort of who I could be in 7 days with a group of people, I said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And
You can't unsee it, right? Once you see it and you experience it, you can't unsee it. Yeah.
it started to feel out of integrity
Right.
for me to keep doing that in an environment where I felt like my hands were tied.
Yeah.
And so I left in 2018, in the winter of 2018, and I started a private practice. And for probably the first year of my private practice, it was a steady referral, just a steady stream of referrals from conventional medical doctors. Um, which was amazing, as like a new business owner and a
Mm-hmm.
solo practitioner. But then what I started to see was everyone coming to me was in this like problem-based paradigm. They
Okay.
wanted to see me only when they had a problem.
To be fixed, essentially, right?
Exactly,
To be
which
fixed.
is
Yeah.
so different than the mental
Mm-hmm.
health model. And I started to think about that in a really different way, right? So it's like, if you only come to me when you're in crisis, all I can do is get you out of crisis, right? But if you come to me when you're not in crisis, which, in conventional medicine is your well woman visit once a year,
Preventative, essentially. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that you have to go through all the screening stuff, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this whole checklist of things that you want to do for different age groups. So that doesn't really work. It doesn't really give you time to ask someone like, what is your purpose?
Right.
How was your childhood? What are the patterns in your romantic relationships that you're also
Mm-hmm.
see that we're also seeing in your blood work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What
And
survival
so
type are you running? Yeah. Yep.
yeah. And what do you really want
Yep.
beyond just like getting out of this crisis?
And I think that's hard for a lot of people to answer, to be honest. And for people to really decide what they want, I think is a very difficult question for people. But yes, carry on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's partially, because so many of us are just like treading water to stay okay. And we could get into a whole conversation about
Yeah,
about
about
us
that. Yeah.
as a culture and why that is. But our medical system certainly doesn't help.
No.
And so I started to realize that like I couldn't really work in this paradigm of like, you come to me when something hurts and I give you a solution, right? We couldn't really get to the other quadrants because the truth is, when someone's really in crisis, like acute crisis,
Mm-hmm.
it's not an easy time to start having the conversation about what does it all mean, right?
100%. 100%.
What is like happening here spiritually?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
might.
They can't hear you, right? Yeah. So I talk about that where like the physical health is the foundation because when you're in pain, you can't think of anything else other than getting out of pain, right? We can't talk about, yeah, your spiritual path and your growth and your emotions. You're like, I'm in pain. When the body is in physical pain, you have to get the body out of physical pain before you can go deeper. Yeah, I agree 100% with you on that. Yeah.
That's right. And it's interesting because in my practice, like a lot of the time I attract people who are like, psychics, intuitives, channelers, and they usually come to me because there's something going on in their body.
Mm-hmm.
And, what they haven't been able to see for themselves is they're too out of balance in that spiritual quadrant, right? And we didn't incarnate to just be spiritual beings, right? You came into
Mm-mm.
a body. And so when we start to drift too far into the spiritual quadrant, usually the body gets sick and it
Yep.
pulls us
Pulls you
down.
back in. Mm-hmm.
And so
Makes
I
sense.
basically what I started to realize the more I worked with people on my terms, right? And my initial visit is 2 hours, my follow-ups are
Yeah.
90 minutes. Like,
So
I
great.
really leave a lot of space to listen to what people are not saying. And what started to come out of that was what I like to call holistic intelligence, which is basically like, a measure or an awareness of like, which of these quadrants are you overemphasizing and which of these quadrants are you neglecting or underemphasizing? And then how do we want to balance the scales? Because there are so many different ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our system, the medical system, right? I think it's interesting even that they call what you and I would probably categorize as mental and emotional, and maybe even spiritual health as mental health,
Yeah.
right?
It's all mental health. Mm-hmm.
It's all just like lump summed into mental health, where you and I talked about this. The mechanism by which our mental processes work is very different than the mechanism by which our emotional processes work. They need different things to be processed. And so lumping those together is really problematic. And so basically, you have our paradigm that says there's physical health and there's mental health. And, you know, that in itself is an imbalance. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
is thinking about, how do I feel my way through this? What are
Mm-hmm.
my emotions trying to tell me? And nobody is really thinking about, like, okay, well, how do we work with the intelligence of symbol? How do we work with intuition and intention to actually shift the health outcomes that we want, or, our health outcomes in general?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would love for one day. It's on my list of goals for this method, this practice, this concept, this idea to go all the way down, all the way through, right? Everybody focuses and practices looking at it from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health realms. Maybe one day.
I
But
hope so, and I think, like, you're like a bigger thinker than me. You're like a systems thinker, and I'm more of like a zoom in. I think the way that I've been, trying to do this in the world is teaching people how to
hmm
sort of like understand it, so then they can decide, well, I can take this medication, but I'm going to pray over it, right? I'm going to generate gratitude for it. I'm going to like really catch my thoughts, my language, my beliefs when I'm straying toward, this will never work for me,
Yep.
right? So that within their own sort of mini micro ecosystem, they can get all four quadrants of themselves on board. But my dream is big, and same as yours. I would love to see this, infiltrate the systemic level.
I think it's possible. I just think it's going to take some time. And I think that's why I definitely want to continue conversations with you and work with you and have you come in and teach facilitators. Because so what I'm building, and we talked about this, and I'll talk about it now. What I'm building in Mexico is a center, is a place where you can experience all four dimensions, all four quadrants, right? Like before you even step foot, we're going to start balancing the frequency and figure out if you even believe you're worthy of healing. We're going to start balancing healing, the healing frequency in your life, right? Because everything is so much deeper than most of us fully understand. And to go to the root of the root of the root, I mean, we got to go quantum, right? So it's incorporating all those little pieces and hypnotherapy around your beliefs and meditation and yes, regenerative medicine. But that's not the first thing you do to somebody is give them regenerative medicine, right? Like let's address all of these other aspects first, and then we can pull in the regenerative medicine. And then let's see what the outcomes are like, because we're equipping you before you come in and afterwards from an integration standpoint to do the work. Because to your point, these are still just going to be tools, right? And the coin I'm using, the term I'm using is you are the medicine. You are the medicine. And it's our job. I feel like my calling and part of yours is to empower people, right? To make those decisions on their own based on their own intuition and what's best for them, because everybody is so different and we need different things and we're in different places. And so understanding that you are sovereign, you have the capability to heal yourself. You just have to get to a place where the noise and all of the outside world of circumstances is not affecting you to the point where you can't make the best decision for yourself and how you're meant to heal, right? Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I think like a really interesting, like kind of philosophical conversation is like, what is you, right? And so,
Mm,
because you mentioned the quantum level, and one of the ways that I think about the concept of holism is that it's dynamic and it's contextual, right? So, to some degree, like there is a version of me that is Erica that is ends at my skin, right? And my physical body. And then there's a version of me that is part of you, right? And we know
mm-hmm.
this that like, our heart rates can sync and there's a field of
Quantum entanglement. Yeah.
between us. And so I always think it's such a fascinating thing. And it's one of the reasons I love to work with groups because you really get to see it. But there's like, what are my beliefs about healing? And then there's sort of like, what are the collective beliefs? And how much can I heal when the collective that I
Collective.
exist in is
Mm-hmm.
like, has a different belief system. And this is why I think like, obviously, we start on the individual level, right? But I also think it's really interesting to think about the more practitioners we train and the more people who are thinking like this and the
Mm-hmm.
more clinics you open, right, that are operating like this and the more people that are touched, eventually we hit a cultural tipping point, right, where the zeitgeist changes. And when that happens, I feel
Mm,
like we're going to see real breakthroughs.
yep. Oh my
It,
gosh. Yes. Yeah.
it's really fascinating. And, you also touched on something before we started recording that I think is like a really cool topic and worth mentioning, which is the fact that, like, you and I found each other. We both sort of operate with this understanding of these four quadrants. And you said something like, and obviously these aren't like, our ideas, right? This is like a truth that, there's four suits of the tarot, right? There's like this idea of like these four dimensions are not like, don't belong to you or I. And I think it's really, cool to think about the fact that this isn't really something new, but it's a remembrance of
Mm-hmm.
something that we've been disconnected from. And yet, it is new because it's a different time. And it's sort of like, I've done a lot of work in the Amazon and, the healers down there, they understand this, right? They understand that
It's ancient wisdom, right? Essentially. Yeah.
you can drink a plant, you can go to the spiritual realms, but you can purge out of your physical body and you can change your thoughts and cry it out, right? They
Mm-hmm.
understand that it's all connected. And I think like what the invitation is, in our world and in our culture is like, what does that look like today in this culture, right? How do we sort of like um evolve traditions
Mm-hmm.
in a way that
Integrate it.
honors the tradition, but also in a way that sort of like um fits the practicality of modern day living. And that's, I think, just like a really interesting ongoing discussion and inquiry that I'm in.
Yeah. 100%. I've done plant medicine a few times. Well, actually, not haven't done ayahuasca, but I've done a heart protocol, which is psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine twice, and then I've done psilocybin in the Amazon, and incredible experiences, incredible tools. But I've definitely learned. I mean, you come back home to daily life, to life,
That's
in
right.
Texas, where my kids have school, and the garbage truck comes and I have to pay bills and right. Like those experiences are magical, but if you don't integrate what you learned into daily life, then you end up at a place that's very discombobulated and confusing, in my opinion. And so I think part of what I would love to help teach people, and maybe this is something we could work on together, is they're micro commitments is what I call them, right? These are micro commitments every single day, like brushing your teeth and brushing your hair, whatever, that you commit to yourself every day, because every day it is a remembrance. Every minute, every moment, I forget who I am. I had this discussion with myself last night while I was meditating. I was like, what is happening? Like, I feel so discombobulated. And I'm like, you forgot who you are again. Like, you have to remember who you are. But that takes you doing the work and putting in the time to meditate, to journal, to connect to source, to pause before you respond, to look at your thoughts as clouds in the sky and not part of who you are, to, you know what I mean? Like there's those little micro commitments within those 4 quadrants that I think it would help people. What have you found to be the most helpful or for your patients in terms of like on a daily micro commitment that helps people kind of find that coherence within themselves?
I really like the term micro commitment. And I think what really changes things for my clients is the perspective shift, right? And finding little like things that become anchors for them to remember, right? So like, not everyone is a parent, but parenting sure makes it easy in some ways, even though it's like the hardest job ever. Like, watching a young child discover something new that their body can do, or, um, just like experiencing the realms of imagination, it
Mm-hmm.
can really bring you back. And so I think what works really well in my practice is one, finding what are those things in someone's life where they really help them remember that this is a wild, amazing gift to be alive. And the other thing that I find is really helpful for people is just understanding that like when you set an intention, all of your efforts go toward that intention, right? Like so often, people have that experience where you go to a yoga class, the beginning of the class, the teacher says, set an intention. And then like the teacher never really brings you back to the intention. You sort of forget that every breath, every time your muscles are shaking, every drop of sweat is like you tending to that seed of your intention. And so I do a lot of that with my clients is helping them remember that they're already doing the work. And we just need to tie the work to the intention, right? What is
Mm-hmm.
the outcome they want? Where do they want their efforts to go? And I find that that can be very profound for people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. You're so spot on about the yoga part. I've never thought of it like that, but you're 100% spot on, at least in the classes that I've taken. I'm sure that, some teachers do that. One of the ways that I describe it too is that when you start living life like this, you are no longer affected by life. You
Mm,
are affecting life, right?
yeah.
So it puts you in a different seat to where things are just happening and you're responding constantly. Like you said, when you have that intention, you are now affecting your day and your months and your weeks and outcomes and things like that instead of being affected by them. So yes, I imagine that is a very powerful paradigm shift for your patients.
Yeah, and I think what I would say about that is both are happening,
Sure.
right?
Yes.
But the being affected by is not necessarily a bad
Bad
thing, right?
thing.
Because the way that you're affected by life sometimes is like the litmus test, right? For like it helps you see how you're showing up and
Mm-hmm.
what, intentions and ideas and actions you're really tending to. And then if you're being affected in a way that doesn't feel good, then that's basically the mirror that's like, pause here.
Mm-hmm.
how do I want to tweak this? Right. And so I actually like the idea of them being in a or all of us, myself included, being in more of like a conversation with life where it's like,
Love it.
I'm creating and then I'm experiencing what I've created.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't
Mm-hmm.
like what I'm experiencing, then I got to create something
Something
different.
different. Mm-hmm. I love that. That's so true. You're 100% right. And it's almost even like little tests. Like, okay, you said you're this. Now you're going to get the test to see. Like that's how what I'm dealing with right now. Right? You're saying all of these things. You're all these things, but now we're going to actually find. Now you're actually going to find out if what you say you believe and how you live you actually do when things don't happen the way that you anticipate them or want them. Right? And so yeah, to your point, it is that back and forth with life and with the universe and that is what allows us to grow, right? To that next level and then continue to acknowledge, okay, what's the next thing? And I don't think we ever arrive either, by the way. I feel like there is no destination. we're not, I'm not like, okay, 5 more tests and I'm going to get here. Like there is no
Right.
destination. The beauty in it is appreciating the experience and the journey. And it's so hard to do when you're in it and you're in a season like winter or whatever season that, may be difficult, but that's also part of the experience, and that's really helped me. And what's helped me too is to remember I chose this. I chose this. Like we chose this. Do you believe that? Do you believe like our souls chose the experiences that we are having?
I absolutely believe that. And I think that, you know, what happens is like we forget choosing it, right?
Right.
And we
Right.
forget why we chose it. And it's like that separation from sort of that version of ourselves, which is oneness, right? That's often when we feel like victims and when like a lot of suffering happens. And but that's also part of being human, and suffering is part of the human experience. And I think what a lot of people have the most trouble with is holding the paradox that like it's not that you're either a victim or a creator, right? Or you're in control or you're not in control, but both of those things are true, right? I am like both the creator and the created. I have
Mm-hmm.
agency over my life and I'm in control of my destiny, but also I'm not, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a tornado could come through at any given moment. And so I think that our culture has a really difficult time holding both of these things. But it's in holding both of them that we actually find so much meaning
Yeah.
because, and if we were talking about the chakras, I call this the heart chakra, or I don't call it the heart chakra, but like that's where I would focus
Yeah.
on the journey because it's like if we're too much in this sort of life is happening to me mentality and experience, then we really suffer and it can
Mm-hmm.
feel really disempowering. But
Mm-hmm.
if we're too much up here in the like
I
abracadabra,
created all. Yeah. 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 It's all me. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
then like we sort of lose connection with what it means to be a human being, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's in being able to hold the two that like we really find ourselves as human. And that's a really beautiful thing to me. And I think, if there's like one thing I could say that has really, really emerged from me from now, almost a decade of practicing in this kind of 4-quadrant holistic way, is that our health is truly the most meaningful spiritual practice there is. And healthcare should be so drenched with meaning that every time you engage with your health, whether it's getting a lab back or a stem cell injection or a peptide or an antidepressant, you should feel so connected to like the truth of your existence. And if
Mm-hmm.
that's not happening, we're missing something.
That's it. Enough said. I completely agree. 100%. I have nothing to add to that. It's beautiful. So how do people find you? So if they are interested in, so what are you doing now? Are you still taking on private clients? Are you just holding retreats? Tell me a little bit about that. So for people who are like, oh my gosh, I love this woman. I want to talk to her. How would they go about doing that?
I do a few different things. I do have a private practice, and I open the doors usually a few times a year. It just sort of depends what my capacity looks like. But I love working with people one-on-one. I'm like not one of these practitioners that I think will ever give up one-to-one practice.
Yeah.
I find just like so much meaning and depth in being able to see one person and tend to their unique needs. I also do at least one group course a year, and I think the next one is going to start in January. I call it Root Cause Revolution. It's about this idea of root causes being not singular, but more like root systems. And we sort of look at the idea of root cause through this 4-quadrant lens. And then we follow the archetypal path of the chakras, looking at 7 themes and how they show up as root causes. So that'll start in January.
Okay.
Right
I want
now,
to take that.
I have a wait list for it, so I can share
Wow.
it with you.
Okay.
Substack is a great place. I'm like pretty consistent on Substack. The publication is called Becoming Whole.
Awesome.
Instagram, it's Dr. Erica Matluck. And and then I do one 7-day immersion a year, which is I think when right
Mm-hmm.
before we were connected. That's what
Mm-hmm.
our mutual contact had come on. It's called Gnosis. And the next one is in July in upstate New York.
And you'll
Um,
post information about that, I presume, as obviously it gets a little bit closer. So anybody can follow
exactly.
you and then get more information. Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's
Fantastic.
it.
Well, I look forward to working with you in some capacity. I think it will all come together and all be made clear in due time. Thank you for your time, Dr. Erica. I appreciate it. And until next time, this has been the True Healing Experience podcast with your host, Dana Herrera. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to the True Healing Experience podcast with me, Dana Herrera, where science meets soul. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss any new episodes released weekly on Fridays. To learn more about my book, The 4 Dimensions of Wellness, and the True Healing Experience, go to www.theco.life. That's www.theco.life. Until next time, I'm Dana Herrera, and this has been the True Healing Experience, an extraordinary podcast.